serious, what are some scary, horrifying, creepy things that have happened to you, or in general, that could have a plausible explanation, but still freak you out? When I was like 4 or 5, I remember waking up one day in the early hours of the morning. It was still dark outside, and I groggily made my way to my parents' room, expecting them to still be asleep. When I opened the door, the room was fully lit. My parents were nowhere in sight, and there was a man and a woman I don't recognize on the bed. The following events are pretty hazy in my memory, but basically they seemed surprised, and one of them asked something along the lines of "Who's he?" to the other. Still too sleepy and young to process anything, I just closed the door, went back to my room and fell asleep again. When I woke up in the morning, my parents were there, and the day continued as normal. I've never seen those two people again, and until now I'm still wondering if I had a supernatural encounter, or if it's just a really vivid dream I had as a child. I've posted this before, but here it is again. The plausible explanation is sleep paralysis, but I've never experienced anything like it before or after this incident. When I was in elementary school, I shared a queen-size bed with my older sister, and our family dog, a mutt that looked like a short-haired lassie, would sleep at the foot of our bed every night. When I was about 6 years old, I woke up one night around midnight and saw a dark figure standing at the foot of the bed. The figure was entirely in black without any eyes or a face. I tried to wake my sister up, but she rolled over to go back to sleep. My sister must have accidentally kicked the dog, because the dog woke up and raised her head and started growling at the figure at the foot of the bed. The growling then woke my sister up and she saw the figure and started screaming. When my parents came into the room and turned the light on, nothing was there. To this day, both my sister and I are adamant that we saw a ghost or other demon in our room. We know we aren't crazy because the dog saw it too. My dad and I were talking about my grandfather one weekend. My dad lived with his parents at the time as money was very tight. My grandfather was in the hospital for pneumonia and heart problems, which he was no stranger to as he had survived a few heart attacks at this point, due to a mix of diabetes, prescription meds, and heavy drinking. We both heard what sounded like coughing come from where his room is. This was somewhat late, and my dad, my sister Zed and I were the only people there. My dad and I were creeped out the day the least. I joked that my grandfather had died and he was haunting the house. Not a minute later, the hospital calls. My grandfather hadn't died. In fact, he was being difficult with the nurses and he wanted to call to talk to my grandmother about something. I don't actually know what caused the coughing sound, other than us just hearing things. But the fact that the hospital called so soon after I said he died was the creepiest part. Moved into a cottage on the mountain. My backyard was a tree line. The moon lit everything so beautifully well. It hardly seemed like night at all. I began having recurring dreams. It was the same dream every single time. In my dream I would see myself laying asleep in my bed and then it switched from third person view to first person view. In the dream, I awoke to a whispering female voice. The thirst hit me. In the dream it was unbearable. I would climb out of bed, open the French doors, and head to the kitchen sink to get a glass of water. As I neared the sink, the voice would get louder and louder, but I still couldn't make it out. It was as if it were a foreign language, but not one that I had heard before nor since. Then, standing in my kitchen and looking out the window right above the sink to the tree line in my backyard well lit by the moon's light, the voice suddenly became clear. She said, "The devil is in the woods." At this point a shadow darted quickly behind the tree line. I would then wake up from my dream, standing in my kitchen in the exact spot that I was in the dream. This happened almost every week for the entire duration of time that I lived in that house. It also always happened close to or right at 3 a.m. My friend asked me if I would go to her house after work and feed her dog as she would not be home until 3 a.m. or so. She worked in a bar. I arrived at her house at 8:30 p.m. and got the key she had left under the mat to unlock the door. Once I unlocked the door, I turned off the alarm and put the key in a white bowl by the door. I am 100% sure I put the key in the bowl. I fed the dog and played with him for a little while, then went to lock up the house again and leave, but the key was gone. Just then the dog started furiously barking and ran full speed out of the kitchen and up the stairs. He just sat there growling at nothing. The feeling that came over me at that time was so strange. I randomly burst out crying and couldn't stop. Eventually I calmed down, put the dog back into the kitchen and looked for the key. It was literally nowhere. I ended up finding another key that worked, so I just locked the house and left. I told my friend and she looked daily for about a week. Then one day, the key was back in the white bowl. One time I was having beers with my friends at one of their houses. We were sat at a table that fits about 16 people. We were a large group, and I was sat at the far end and one of my friends all the way across the table. I then jokingly crumbled up a bit of label from my beer bottle to a ball the size of a pea and said I could throw it in my friend's beer bottle for €1,000,000 from the other side of the table. We were drunk and playing games. I fucking made the shot. I have no idea how I did it. I didn't even aim. I just picked up the ball of paper and immediately threw it in one swift motion over a distance of about 6-7 meters inside the small opening of his beer bottle. I never understood how I did that and find it very creepy. He still owes me $1 million. I lived in one of the oldest apartments in the town I was living in. Couldn't sleep one night, but eventually I must have dozed off as I started having an incredibly vivid dream of myself laying in bed. Everything the exact same as in reality, except my door opened and a creepy old lady started ominously walking towards me. I woke up and freaked out. I always lock my door. But just to be sure, I went and checked it. It was unlocked. I was reading the Ask to get inspiration for a short story I wanted to write. Shortly after I started hearing this jingle from my bedroom window in the middle of the night. There was nothing in the backyard or neighbors' houses that could have caused it. Not even a wind chime. Then I woke up one morning and my grandpa's painting was upside down. Several days later the knives were all the wrong way in the holder. Then the garbage can was backwards. And that kept going on and on and on. Most of it got explained. Turns out there was an archdiocese really close to our house and the bells in the tower would go off if the wind was just right. And my son knows I like creepy things, so he did most of the turning household items backwards and came clean when I started getting scared instead of just having fun with it. Only thing that has no explanation is my grandpa's painting. My reaction with the painting is what made my son decide to run with it. But he did not turn it upside down. A few years back, I lived with my mother and German Shepherd in a 2-bedroom rented townhome. I got home from work one day and went about my daily routine. When it came time to eat dinner, I knocked on my mom's door to come and eat. I smelled cigarette smoke and heard her grunt a response. So I went back down and ate alone. I figured I would just put a plate away for her. Fast forward to about 2 AM. I am awoken by someone holding my hand and gently shaking it. I immediately shoot straight up and look around. My dog, who is overly protective and sleeps with me every single night, isn't in bed. She isn't even in the room. She most definitely was on my bed when I went to sleep. I sleep with the bedroom door shut and locked. She is scratching at my closed and locked bedroom door from the hallway. Frantic, I bolt for the door, let her in, and she is searching the whole room. I'm now yelling for my mother. No answer. I force my dog to walk down the hallway with me. I still smell cigarette smoke. I bang on my mom's door. No answer. So I just open it. She isn't even home. The bed is made and her TV is off. My dog and I search the whole entire house. Nothing is out of place. All the doors and windows are still locked. I was freaked out to say the least. The next day I called my mom and she told me she left early the day before to go visit my sick grandfather. I remember one time as a child. I was home on a Saturday morning. For a bit of context. Back then, my mom would usually go into work on Saturday mornings and be home usually by 12 PM. Now back to the story. I was sitting on the couch watching TV. The time started approaching 12, which meant that my mom was almost home. I very vividly remember hearing a car door close, hearing the car lock, and my mom walking into the house calling my name. When I got up to go greet her, there was no one there. Still creeps me out. Context: my grandfather was a truck driver and taught me everything I know about driving, especially in snow. I used to work at a drugstore, and one night I was closing another store in our chain and we had a snow squall that unexpectedly dropped a few inches of snow in our area. I wasn't very familiar with the area, and I had my mom's car, so I wasn't used to the car either. The snow was still coming down and I couldn't see, so I was creeping home and panicking as I saw cars spinning out all around me. All of a sudden, I saw a light in my passenger side view mirror, and I turned my head, and sitting in the passenger seat, plain as day, I saw my dead grandfather. I heard him say he knew that I wasn't freaked out by a little snow. And then I heard his voice rattling off all the things he taught me about driving in the snow. I looked back towards the road, and then he was gone. It was a calming experience. When I saw him, it was more okay. Pops here. I'm okay, instead of OMG you're supposed to be dead WTF. And I stopped panicking and got home without a problem. It was most likely just my brain eyes whatever playing tricks on me to get me to stop panicking. But to this day it still freaks me out. My family and I went to Dubai in 2004. I was 7, and we were in the hotel pool when we see two big men suddenly come in and steal this family's little girl who looked around the same age as me and sped her into a car. There's nothing anyone could have done because we were all in the pool, and the daughter's mother started crying hysterically. We ended up having to write a witness report for the police. I still wonder if they got their little girl back. When I was younger, my mom, my grandma and I liked to go to this little fruity shop that was about 40 miles from our home. It was a cute little place where you could get the classic tea and sandwiches and cute little desserts and all. One time we went. All was normal. But on the way home we received a call that my other grandma had passed away. Very sad. But as she had been battling cancer, not exactly unexpected. The next time we went, a few months later, on the way home we received a call that my uncle had died suddenly of a heart attack. Creepy coincidence for sure. But we still did not think too much of it at the time. We went back a third time a few months after that. And for the third time on the way home, we received the phone call that someone had died. This time it was my grandpa's brother. We never went back to that tea shop again. Now all of these people were elderly and not exactly in the best of health. So them passing away around the same time was not exactly creepy. But the fact that 3 separate times that we went to this place, 3 people died the same day and we received the calls on the way home, makes me think something about that place was cursed. It has since closed, but I'm still nervous to even go to that area to this day. Not really scary per se, but kind of creepy I guess. Things keep up and disappearing from my home. For example, I live in a condo, so there's not much space, so my and I keep the small kitchen appliances in the cupboards and pull them out when needed. About 3 months ago I pulled the toaster out to use it but was interrupted, so I left it on the counter. I came back a few hours later and it was gone. My significant other hadn't been home, and my mother, who lives 2 doors down and borrows my things including my toaster, is adamant she didn't borrow it. I even searched her house up and down along with mine. Other things such as towels, oven mitts, drinking glasses, slippers, a ring and more have gone missing, but the toaster is the most curious as it's really hard to lose a freaking toaster, and who steals a toaster? When I was around 13 years old I had the absolute worst nightmare you could imagine. I was in a room with boxes in it when suddenly the lighting of everything turned red and started to warp into a blur. This was accompanied with intense feelings of fear and despair. There was nothing particularly scary about the imagery I saw, but more so the emotions associated with it. It was as if someone somehow injected the maximum dosage of every negative emotion we humans can feel directly into my bloodstream. And I was feeling all of them at once. I woke up to find myself screaming and my mom running into the room. The next day I went to my dad's house for the weekend. I told him I had a nightmare the other night, to which he responded he had one of the worst nightmares of his life too. And once I asked what it was, he told me he was in a warehouse filled with boxes being chased by someone. I had not told anyone about the details of my dream, and there wasn't any way he would have found out about my bad dream from my mom since they are separated. Our nearly identical dreams happened the same night and also around the same time, 3 AM. Growing up in a very old house, we kids always suspected it was haunted. Every night from the basement it sounded like someone was running up and down the hallways on the main floor. No one was awake to be running. My dad saw a shadow figure standing on the side of the bed on my mom's side, etc. One afternoon we heard a giant crash come from our guest room and ran to open the door and see what had fallen. Nothing was broken or knocked over, but a giant handprint that looked as though the fingers had claws was dragged down the fleece blanket on the bed. We tried to attribute it to the dog, but since then I started believing in spirits. Really late to the party on this one, but I've got a story from Boy Scout camp. I was 12 or so, out fishing in a small rowboat with one of the other guys in our troop. As we drifted around the small fishing lake, there was a much larger lake for boating and swimming. At one point I saw something in the water. It wasn't a fin, or even a shape that I could describe or remember at this point, but I remember seeing something down there and that it was big. I pointed it out to my friend, who looked down and said I saw it move. I didn't know I could row a boat that fast. We were back on dry land in a minute or two. Thinking back, I'm sure it was just a log or a rock, or whatever detritus you might find in a lake. But in the moment, I was certain that Cthulhu or something was hiding in that lake and we had awoken it from its millennia-long slumber. I can still remember the fear and the bitter taste of adrenaline in the back of my throat. We just moved into our house and I was laying upstairs. My bedroom had the bathroom attached and my cats loved to sleep in there. I suddenly heard the sound of someone possibly walking around downstairs and was home alone. The noises stopped downstairs, but then there was this wet, crunching, squelching noise in the bathroom, and I noticed my cats were both on the bed with me looking toward the bathroom. Knowing they heard it too made it way creepier, and my gut told me to get out and go downstairs. I suddenly felt like I would be safer downstairs with a potential burglar than in there with whatever made that noise. There was no one downstairs, and when my husband got home he didn't find anything at all in the bathroom. No source of any of the sounds was found anywhere. The bathroom window was open, so it's likely it was something outside that just sounded closer than it actually was, but it was terrifying at the time. Oh, I got some good ones for this. One time me and my buddies went to an abandoned church called Hell's Church. We're from the south, so this church is where a whole bunch of nasty, racist, horrible murder torture shit would happen. It's called Hell's Church, so you know, good place to go at night. We got there and there was a red light shining through the front glass. Spooky. So naturally our first thought is to dare our buddy to go knock on the front door. After about 5 minutes of working up the courage to do it, one of my friends gets out of the car and goes towards the front door. He does it, takes about 3 steps from the door, and it fucking opens. I've never seen him run faster in my entire life. Homie dives back in the car. Driver slams on the gas. Car is in reverse and we go screaming towards the woods by the church. As we're screeching backwards, three lights turn on in the woods and are heading to the car. To this day we still don't know what the FCK was going on. Still freaks me out, man. Scary. When I was young, I would go to the woods behind my neighborhood every weekend with my sister and best friend. For context, it turns out that it was land owned by a power plant and it was totally trespassing for us to be there. There was a lot of interesting stuff there, and the area was huge, so we had a lot of fun regardless. One time, however, we found this little shack with a bunch of levers and switches that had a cord running from it to some power lines. Sounds like a cool thing for a kid to find, right? The door was riddled with bullet holes. Squashed bullets were everywhere. It smelled like rotten flesh. Dried blood was all over the walls. And there was a broken hatchet inside. A few meters away there was a bloodstained coat hanging from a tree branch. And even further down was an open manhole that was closed every other time we went there. The next time we came back both the hatchet and coat were gone and the manhole was sealed up. I knew that hunters went into that area often because there were a lot of deer. But something about the scenario screams murder more than hunting. Double quote. For the past 6 or so months, I keep waking up to weird night photos on my phone. It's still happening. Usually 1 to 3 photos a month. I honestly have no explanation. They are all time-stamped during hours I'm asleep. And they seem fairly normal and mundane. But taken from odd angles. I usually charge my phone next to my bed. You need a password to unlock it. My bed is right by my window and all the photos are taken so close to the window that whoever is taking them has to be right beside me in bed. Or reaching over me. It's very, very strange. I even got a new phone and this has continued. No explanation for it. But it freaks me out. They are usually upwards angles. Taken through my window at the street light or sky. I honestly welcome theories cause it's very, very weird. I thought maybe I take photos in my sleep. But that would be one heck a weird case of sleepwalking. And often my phone isn't touched in the same position I left it when I went to bed. One time, when I was younger, my friend and I enjoyed exploring abandoned buildings out in the country. One time we go to this old plant or factory or whatever it was and we find a way in through a garage door that had fallen off its tracks. Just inside was an old forklift and some water crates. The kind that are a big tank on a pallet. Well, we explore this place for about 2 hours I think until we finally come out the other side and walk back to our car around the outside. We come back to find the entrance we used was now blocked with the water crates stacked up. Closing off the door. And the forks from the forklift were still poking through the pallet on the last one. What bothered us about this was this was a propane powered forklift and at no point could we hear it in operation in an otherwise silent building. B. There were no other vehicles present that could have brought someone here to operate the dang thing. Was this a spectral forklift trying to imprison us in this old building where no one could hear our cries for help? Probably not. But we still note the FCK out of there real quick. This just happened. Right as the clock hit 1 AM. I heard a ton of random dog howling coming from outside. I live in a rural area and coyotes are common. And it's not uncommon to hear them howl or my neighbor's dogs howl. But this time the sound wasn't coming from the direction of my neighbor's house. And there was a variety of howls. It didn't sound like just one type of howl like the coyotes usually do. Hearing it while reading the sub gave me some chills. I used to wander off when I was 2 or 3. My parents were good at keeping me close. But once they had friends over, mom was inside and dad was outside. And they each thought the other one had me with them. Once they realized I was gone the whole neighborhood was out searching for me. They found me near a ditch filled with water. And we're understandably relived. They were also confused because somehow I had managed to set loose the neighbor's somewhat unpleasant and temperamental dog. He was kept in a locked kennel. And his owner had been at my parents' house. They have no idea how someone my size could have opened the door. And why he'd chosen to take a walk with a toddler. I'm going to sound like a nutcase but here's a few. Every time a major shift in my life is about to happen I frequently see random change on the ground. People drop change all the time. But it's weird. I will see it multiple times in a day. It's typically pennies. Sometimes it's silver. Sometimes it's days straight. Other times doesn't last long. A few days after my mom passed away her nightstand light came on. The issue with that was there was no one in the room. That side was on a different breaker. And the breaker had tripped randomly. The light was on. Before an extremely bad date I got a text from my own number saying 911. I had a feeling to cancel. But I didn't. The guy left me stranded with 2 strangers. They kindly took me home. It was creepy though. This was back in 2011. My old dog was in the living room with me and we both heard a voice coming from the bathroom. My dad was in there so I figured he might just be talking to himself. My dog took one look at the wall and hopped right in my lap. All 120 pounds of him. My dad walks out a while later pale as a ghost. It took him a minute. But he told me my mom had said his name from the closet bathroom. She had died 3-4 days before that. When I was 17, my mom took me and my siblings to Universal Studios in Orlando. We stopped at some cafeteria-like place within the park for lunch. I think it was Popeye themed or something. And they had old music playing over a loudspeaker. All of a sudden when the song switched, my mom covered her ears and yelled at me and my brother and sister to do the same. We were confused. But we complied. After the song was over, she unplugged her ears and I asked her what that was about. And she said the song was cursed in our family. It was written in the 1800s and apparently whenever my great-grandfather happened to hear it, someone in the family would die that day. I looked it up and it's called The Fountain in the Park, and since I thought that was a load of bullshit, I started listening to it on my phone. My mom yelled at me and took my phone away. So I only really know a little bit of it. It starts like, I was strolling through the park one day in the merry month of May. A few months later, my little cousin and I watched a new episode of Steven Universe, where Steven and the Crystal Gems go to the moon and Steven starts singing a little parody of the song. Something along the lines of I was bouncing on the moon one day. That same day, my mom's uncle died. I was 18 in the early 70s. Hitchhiking was common. My ride only went to an intersection going out of town. I needed to get a ride to the next town. I started walking. On either side of the road were tall cornfields. It was dark. As I walked, I thought I heard footsteps inside the cornfield. I stopped. The steps continued a few steps and stopped. I ran. They ran. I abruptly did an about face and ran. I tripped them up and it was a few seconds before they turned and ran my direction. I dodged like I was going to turn around. They ran that direction. Stopped when I ran the opposite direction and came my way. Finally a car was coming and I stood in the middle of the road and made them stop. I jumped in and never saw what was stalking me. I could tell by the footsteps that it was bipedal. It haunts me to this day. In high school, my friend and I used to go on little road trips into the country in search of abandoned farmhouses. One time, out in the middle of absolutely nowhere, we stopped randomly at this large drainage pipe in a ditch just off the side of a road. It probably wouldn't have been noticed by anyone, except we were actively searching for places to explore. I think it just caught our eye as something we could explore because it was big enough for us to fit into. A few feet into the tunnel thing, there was a large black garbage bag sort of covered by twigs and leaves. It was totally bloated with some sort of gas. I took a stick and poked it. Whatever was inside was, well, hard to describe but soft yet hard. And an odd shape for garbage. And it smelled. It really could have been anything. But we both got this terrible feeling of dread and horror. We just knew. It looked like a suspicious attempt to conceal something. It was just in such an odd spot for it to be a random unintentional thing. Whoever dumped it there didn't want it to be found. We hightailed it out of there so fast. To this day, I still wonder what was actually in the bag. And regret not having just explored a little more or maybe even called the authorities. Even if it was something innocuous, I feel like in some way it would be better to know than not. Not long ago, while driving in a Nashville suburb, I was stopped in a line of cars at an intersection. I had the window down. Next to me on my left, one car ahead was a new Sprint type van. A fancy one. Inside the van, people were screaming and pounding the walls and hitting the window. Had hands pressing on the glass and pounding the window like let us out. The whole van was swaying. I was stuck in traffic with a dead phone, so I couldn't do anything. Could have been a prank. Could have been human traffickers. But if they were being trafficked, I assume they would be forced to be silent. Everyone I tell this to says it was a prank. I'm not sure and it haunts me. I was freaked out. This wasn't really scary per se. But when I was living in Atlanta, right before I left the country to start a working holiday, I noticed a mug in the kitchen exactly like one my grandparents had. My granny might still have it. I honestly don't know. I instantly recognized it, as it has a very distinctive outline of a Tennessee walking horse. My granddad, who has passed, really loved them, and we used to watch videos of horse shows together. We were very close. I thought it was a funny coincidence and resolved to ask my housemates where it came from. But it was a few days before I got the chance to ask both of them, and neither of them had any clue. They hadn't bought it. They didn't remember anyone bringing it over. They hadn't ever seen it before. My mom visited shortly after and confirmed, though I didn't really have any doubts, that it was identical to the one at my grandparents' home. I wish I had been able to bring it with me when I left, but I was pretty sure I'd break it. I kind of think it was my granddad saying hi, or maybe sending me off. I have a picture of it, just to confirm I didn't dream the whole thing. So, some background. My apartment complex has multiple stories to it, and I happen to live on the first. Anyway, one night, I remember having this one nightmare where I came home at around 2 AM. As I am walking to the stairs in order to get into my apartment, these two guys that were clearly drunk or on some types of drugs began talking to me. I brush it off, and I begin to walk quicker. I start walking up the stairs and they're still trying to make small talk with me, but I safely get into my apartment and lock the door. For some odd reason, after locking my apartment, I look through the little peephole that is on my door, and I see one of the men who was making small talk with me charging at my door as if to knock it down to get to me. The really creepy thing is that I've experienced this nightmare multiple times, and it always ends at the same time, right before the man gets to my door. Has anyone ever experienced having the same nightmare more than once? I get sleep paralysis, and I can say for sure this is not that. So here it goes. I slept off with TV playing in the background. Woke up hovering over myself. I could see myself sleep like my back was directly on the ceiling facing down on myself. I was fully awake as I could see clearly what was playing on the TV. Then I hear a noise from the corridor and some shadow approaching. Now this is the crazy part. I never actually see what this thing is, but it scared the shit out of me. I could feel goosebumps and my skin crawled just from the thought of what it would do to me. Pure terror. Immediately I fall to the floor and run out the room. Down the corridor towards the main door. My body is still sleeping. As I'm about to open the door, I feel something drag me back down the corridor into the room, then into my body, and I wake up. TV playing, exact same thing I saw while floating. It was a new show and she was wearing exact outfit. It still weirded me out till today. I mean, I had several sleep paralysis episodes and I am already used to the whole shadow BS, so it doesn't scare me anymore, but this one time was different. It felt too real, so I don't know. So when I was about 13, I was home alone and I was in my room when I started to hear what sounded like tapping on the kitchen window. I went to look and there was nothing. Then I heard road from the glass door to our living. I went and looked. Nothing. Then it started on the window and my room. I went and checked. Still nothing. I kept hearing it on random windows throughout the house and I'd go check to find nothing. Then I started to hear a single knock on the windows. One at a time. Kitchen. Living room. My room. Bathroom. And it kept going in a pattern, just one at a time, and finally it stopped. It was quiet for a minute and I was standing in the living room confused and scared when I heard what was like knives scrapping against glass. I checked the kitchen and there was huge claw marks all the way across our 4-foot kitchen window. I ran to grab the phone to call my parents when I looked back and it was gone. 10 years later I've been diagnosed with bipolar and schizophrenia. I'm pretty sure it was all a hallucination, but it still scared the shit out of me. I was sleeping with my boyfriend, in separate beds, dressed, etc. And in the morning my mom came to take something in my room. I woke up with the sound of the door opening. Seeing that I was awake, she asked me, "Why did you put the picture there?" Pointing to the rack, where a framed picture was resting against the wall in an angle, instead of being hanged in the wall. As usual, I didn't put it there. I asked my boyfriend. He didn't either. When my mom tried to lift the picture, The frame fell apart. It was very old. It really looks like something took it out of the wall and put it neatly nested on the top of the rack during the night. Because if it fell from the wall, the glass would shatter and possibly hurt me and my BF. My creepy instance happened a couple years back when I first moved into the house that I currently live in with my parents. Hopped in the shower one day as I was home alone and was just doing my thing when suddenly I hear pounding on my bathroom door. It was slightly muffled by the sound of the shower and music playing off my speakers but was still distinguishable. I automatically assumed my parents had come home since my stepfather frequently bothered me about the length of my showers. Not to mention, there was what seemed to be a disgruntled male voice coming from outside my restroom door. I simply shout, "Don't worry, I'll be out in a sec," as I was surely convinced it was just my annoyed father. I then got out of the shower, lowered my music, and went into the hallway. It was dead silent in my house, which was unusual for my family. I called out for my parents and brother. Not a single response. Starting to panic, I ran to my room and called my parents, to which they informed me that they were just pulling into the driveway and hadn't been inside the house yet.